even though we work as an artist all the time, we're not always speaking and having a chance to reflect and have an interview like this. It's such a great question. It immediately does bring me back to just the house I grew up in. That was literally an artist's home. And it was a place where art was produced and was encouraged, and there was a curiosity about the arts. My mother is a visual artist, and so there were always conversations about art. There were field trips to museums, and at an early age, I didn't appreciate, waiting outside the Met, for example, before the big Cezanne retrospective, and that was in the late 70s, or the Picasso retrospective in 1980. That was a real big one. I didn't appreciate, waiting in line at that time. But what I gained was, unknowingly, the conversation about art, visual art, about form and shape and design and color and texture and composition. That was just how my mom taught her students and spoke about art. And so that was just something that was introduced very naturally. And then my father loved dance and had studied it. So while he didn't pursue that at all professionally, there was a real fondness for dance and for going to shows and musical theater and film and music. So all of that certainly created a context in which understanding that being an artist could be a pathway, a viable one, and then that a supported one. So I think art was just on parade in the house. And because of that support, we all know whatever discipline or field we're interested to pursue, when we have that support, we're certainly set up for success in a different way. So I feel very fortunate about that. It was never questioned from my family that I could pursue a career in the arts. And because of that, it allowed me to do that. And I think that what happened as a kind of pivot point was that moment when I was 16 and I made a decision to not continue to go to summer camp with all the friends that I'd grown up with and had been going to camp with since, and school with since I was in school. And to make that decision to not continue as a counselor in training, but to go to Chautauqua Institution, in this case, and start to study dance. And that was a really exciting shift, of course, because all of a sudden everything had changed. I was in this very immersive environment with a very high rigorous ballet program, in particular that Jean-Pierre Bonfou, formerly from New York City Ballet, who Caroline knows from his artistic directorship down in North Carolina with North Carolina Dance Theater.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've known Caroline, that he had been a teacher of mine when I was a teen.
Nope, now I do.
But when I say teacher, I was there for a modern dance portion of it, and we were privileged to have some ballet classes. Violette Verdi was on faculty, and I mean, there was Eleanor D'Antoineau was there, and Sandra Jennings, and I'm mentioning a lot of New York City ballet dancers, and of course Patricia McBride, Patty McBride was. So it was just this indoctrination into a whole new world, and I was really bitten by that bug early. Continuing my studies at the university for sure shaped me into being an artist. The acquisition of all of that training, that technique, and that was at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And not just the artistry, but the critical thinking artistry. And that's something that I always am happy to speak about as an educator, just the importance of that understanding of a larger set of beliefs, values, and content, which a comprehensive or liberal arts-based institution can provide. So I did begin dancing professionally right after college. I joined Garth Fagan's company a week after I graduated from school, but I don't know that I became an artist at that time in the way that I would say I was a young dancer, and it was exciting to begin a professional career as a young dancer. But just to your question, I think, the formation of an artist is an ongoing formation in the way that the formation of us as people is ongoing, and our identities become more fixed and more secure, and we understand more things about them, but it's still malleable and we're still growing. And I think that's what's exciting, certainly, about it, is I could look back and say, well, sure, okay, I could say I was an artist at 25 or at 30 or 35, but it changes as we gain more knowledge, as our proficiencies increase, and sometimes as dancers, as the proficiencies start to decrease a little bit, or the technical, some technical things might be more out of reach, but then other things become more available, certainly. And so in the whole, it just is exciting to live the progression of understanding more what it can mean, what one might want it to mean to live as an artist, the kind of permission and surrender of that, because there's less, even though I said I didn't question it, it's not so much questioning, but it's more just building on assurances to trust, for example, the tabula rasa of starting a new piece or a new project, to feel comfortable being vulnerable, to really try to get to the heart of something in a different way. So I think that all of these types of deepenings influence the work that we make, and that is part and parcel of the art. How do we separate the dancer from the dance? Who was that, Elizabeth, who said that? Was that like Yeats? I don't know if I'm correct. William Butler? Unmute yourself, Elizabeth, if I just want to make sure a reference is being corrected.
T.S. Eliot.
Oh, T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot.
Separate the dancer from the dance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yes.
thank you.
Awesome. So
I don't know if that was a concrete enough answer or if it was just a little more
you danced with
clouds.
the first company you danced with?
With Garth Fagan Dance, yeah. Which had been my dream, everybody. And so I was fortunate, this question that Caroline asks is multi-pronged, because how do you concisely summarize a trajectory when the path is neither linear nor, single? Growing up in Rochester, New York, I was super fortunate because Garth Fagan's company is still and was based there. And for those of you tuning in, that name might not jog an immediate bell. Garth Fagan has had a modern dance company of international renown for 50 years and is most known to a larger audience for choreographing The Lion King. And so what was inspiring about his company was, in short, everything. Starting with the fact that he had a specific vision to start with many previously untrained dancers that he took from the basketball courts in some cases, and shaped into a vision of a particular kind of dancer. And the company's name was the Bottom of the Bucket Butt, ... Dance Theater. And again, this is important dance history, and I'm always happy to share that, because it's really important in how it shaped me too as an artist, because what that philosophy of that company and Garth's philosophy and calling the company that, and the ethos of that was really that there's a possibility if you want to succeed. That would be the distillation of that in my current lens, which I totally agree with. And some of my current students of the moment have heard me speak about that just today and just, this week and last week, because some people's paths are going to be easier and will be more straightforward. And some people's paths will certainly not be smooth, and there'll be cobblestones, and some of those stones will be missing, and, etc. But anybody that's interested in traveling, even without the support that would help, still has agency to make that path, to work towards it. So yes, Garth Fagan's company was the first that I joined after college. And then I worked with Mark Morris Dance Group once I had moved to New York as a guest artist for multiple years, touring internationally with the company and involved in several seasons and repertory with that group. And then it was exactly 25 years ago that, with two colleagues from my undergraduate years, Amy Drum and Lynn Newman, we founded Artichoke Dance Company collectively as a collaborative company, with the idea that a repertory company could have different textures and layers, and they were quite different ranging from the abstract and pure dance in my case, to the acrobatic, to the acrobatic aerial, to the comedic theatrical. But what held together this company of different choreographers was its sweetheart. So sweetheart, not sweetheart, but the sweetheart. And that was for its metaphoric value that we named it Artichoke. So it is a 25th anniversary this year as a company director and choreographer, and Artichoke continues. My direct affiliation with that paused in after its 5th year. However, we had a wonderful 20th anniversary reunion, and we reconstructed works that we had choreographed together. And anyway, so there were a lot of influences that certainly brought me to this point, but it was that specific decision to say, no, I'm all in and dance. I'm all in, and I'll make up for what I don't have, and I'll work to try to acquire it. But the passion was clearly ignited.
Can I burst in?
Sure.
It was Yeats. It was not T.S. Eliot. It was Yeats.
But I think I said Yeats.
Yeah, but it's Yeats.
But I couldn't spell it, and I got the quote. Okay, Elizabeth, thank you. So then would that be William Butler Yeats?
William Butler Yeats.
Yeah, talking about how can we separate the dancer from the dance. And I love that so much because can you, and that doesn't mean that what's happening in the interior, one's personality, one's personhood, one's persona off stage is always what you see. There's a performance, it's in quotes, there's a framing, there's a character that's emerging. And at the same time, it's the body, and it's happening on a cellular level. It's happening unconsciously in every pore to be a dancer. And anyway, so thank you, Elizabeth, for correcting the record there.
Yes, thank you. So when did you start your company after Artichoke or?
That's right. So Artichoke, which was a terrific, I should just mention as an entrepreneurial event for 3 dancers to just decide to form a company in the mid-90s was not happening yet by and large, which is to say it was the end of a boom of dance that had started decades before, certainly through the 70s and 80s with the National Endowment for the Arts and a lot of national funding and companies and big companies. And as I came of age as a dancer with my peers, that environment was starting to shift and companies were folding and disbanding. And it was really something new that, because we're talking about a new form to begin with, right? I mean, so it's like it had ascended and then it was starting to shift. And so for us to just form a company was not something that we had a model for, but we just knew that we could do it through trial and error. Certainly that's how it went. But we were crafty and we were considerate in how we promoted ourselves and how we wanted to. And certainly a lot of that was, again, shaped from all the influences we've talked about, both the mentors I had in the field, which I would include not just the company directors or choreographers, but all of my educators and certainly family and friends, to just understand that there could be a certain integrity with how we could put ourselves forward. So unusually for that time too, our debut concert was not just, it didn't just happen, that wouldn't have maybe been so unusual, but that it had a critical response to it, which again, we really had worked to cultivate, but all you can do is do your part. To have a review in the New York Times, and the Village Voice, and other publications, Attitude, which is a quarterly magazine, Attitude, the Dancers magazine. So there was an attention that was exciting and certainly fueled that. And then the ecosystem shifted, and it was not unusual, certainly for choreographers then, to either form companies or just to work as independent choreographers producing work. But at that time, it straddled the beginning of that shift.
Cool. And so how long has your company been in existence?
Yeah, so 1998 we began, and then we incorporated as a nonprofit in 1999. So we're in our 21st year. We have made it into that milestone. Yeah.
That's exciting. That's exciting. What is some advice that you have for students, emerging artists, current artists, life in general, that either someone gave to you or you just kind of found on your own? Because there's a myriad of things you could probably comes into your mind. Whatever pops first.
Well, I guess what pops first is just to continue a little bit along the lines of what I was saying a few minutes ago, just about this idea of advancing towards a goal. And something that I had mentioned to students just this week, and I think again today, is no one can stop anybody from being a dancer. Like it starts with a frame of mind. It starts with the desire to want to be a dancer. So if I'm talking about that, I might substitute in ceramicist, poet, engineer, mathematician. So I'll speak to dance, but I'm really considering that this is broader than that. And who's going to stop you, and why would you let them, or why would you listen to them? You know, and I don't mean this glibly. I was in a class of students that weren't as well supported as I had been at different times. So I have seen and observed what that could do, where at its worst, somebody might say, no, you'll never be a performer, but you could be a teacher, you know, which is which isn't a terrible thing to say unless that person desires to be a performer and they're being told that because of, for example, the way their body looks, or because of a certain capacity of technique that they might have at that moment. These are very deep and can be wounding statements to receive that could wound one, to have somebody, especially somebody you look up to, in a place of power and leadership. So that turned me on at an early age to a somewhat early age to kind of languaging and that idea. Certainly working professionally also gave me a lot of insight into what do you really need. And as a dancer, okay, so just this week I enjoyed watching, I'm bringing in another ballet reference, which makes it sound like I'm more of a ballerine and just somebody who's watching ballet than I am. I'm actually not, although I always will love it. But how great to see Meryl Ashley coaching Tyler Peck this week. And that's referencing a former prima ballerina coaching a current one with New York City Ballet. Meryl Ashley in her living room and Tyler in the studio. And, you know, my point here is that it's the professional dancers that we consider and the finest companies around the world are in this moment too of needing to continue their growth. It doesn't end. It's the perseverance that is what keeps us going. So to answer your question, the nugget of advice is just to persevere. It's grit, because the high leg, and that's what made me think of ballet right away, just so you're following my train of thought there. I thought of high leg and turns, things that we value, that we do value in dance, that we need, the technique, the virtuosity. Oh, I wish my leg was higher. I wish I could turn more. I wish I had better feet. Like all these are real things that dancers live with. But at the end of the day, none of those things make a dancer. None of those things are going towards your goal. So it really has experience. I would come home from school and I would work on my stretching. I would put one leg under the bed and sort of lodge it there, and then I would open my leg and put my book bag there so I could sit in a second position with my legs from folding in. I did not have the flexibility that I have now. I had to acquire that. And again, knowing that the body is malleable and that there's a plasticity, but that starts in the mind. It starts in the mind for anything. And that's what's so exciting about it. And that's what's exciting about being an educator, is that you can have this opportunity where I know that my students, for the most part, they're gonna listen, and they'll decide if they want to believe it or not, but at least they're gonna hear it. And I can make the case that no one's gonna put an obstacle that can ultimately prevent you. The obstacle will need to be dealt with. So whether you're gonna burrow under it, find a way to squirrel around it, or, you know, catapult over it, that's gonna be different for everybody. The size of the obstacles, the number of them, and all that. But if you want to succeed, then I think perseverance and grit frame that growth mindset and allow for that to bring one towards their desired outcomes.
I highly agree, and others agree too on the chat. Highly agree. Grit, perseverance, especially in the arts world, but like you said, in any world field, it's the same. You need to have grit.
And Caroline, I mean, hearing it back, it's like to not take that out of a larger context of where privilege, equity, access come in to support that. So I think that, again, that's just the point of it's going to be a lot easier for some people. It's going to be harder for others, but still, how can that inner belief and desire, lead to something that really calls one? In that sense, I do believe that it's still possible.
You're right. I mean, it's like you said, there's a boulder, and the boulder looks different for everybody because we all have different lives, different things we're coming from, and how are you going to get around it? But yeah, it boils down to grit. What are you going to do to move that out of your way or go around it? I like it. Yeah.
Grit and flexibility, because it's also going to be something different as we move down the path, and being open to the expectations. So no, maybe I'm not going to dance in this show, or maybe I won't, end up performing on Broadway, but I didn't expect that I was going to get involved in this, regional community dance theater company, and that became even more important, etc. So, I think that along with the perseverance and grit is not being so rigid, the consistency of the movement, but the flexibility of how that might happen.
Yeah, nice. I kind of have a side question that reflects onto that, because it's a kind of a question I'm thinking about as a teacher. How can you encourage or cultivate, maybe the best word, perseverance, grit? How do you, when you have like various levels, it's not really the right word, but like different backgrounds of students.
Yeah.
How do you, any thoughts?
Yeah. And backgrounds or mindsets, even like just perspectives. I think that, Caroline, just repeat it one more time, because I went to another thought and I just need to get it back.
I'm curious. I'm like, this is something I'm researching myself and asking.
Coaching perseverance and grit, like just.
Right.
Well, yeah. I wanted to say, I think part of it is just understanding what it is to be a student and what the difference is between being a student and being a learner. And the difference of being a student as maybe picking up the material. So that could be like memorization or rote, like it's a cursory level. Whereas learning for the sake of that curiosity and that taking more initiative, more integrated thinking, reaching out for more resources and references, and thinking more about interconnectedness. So I think that regardless of discipline, one way that we can model perseverance and grit, besides sharing, anecdotes and stories from people in the field, is just understanding that it's a really individualized switch that can get turned, and that what may seem like a shortcoming, a perceived shortcoming, usually is a strength, and just it may not be clear at the time. But again, like not having this, instead of not having it, framing that to, I don't have it yet. So instead of I can't do this, I would say to a student, well, you just haven't learned how to do it yet. And just by adding yet, it changes things right away. It changes that mindset. It's about, and again, it's not that it's Pollyanna all the time. There's real work that has to be done. But we know that. But the larger umbrella is that, yeah, you know what, you might not have had a lot of grit in your life because everybody's backgrounds are different, and you might have grown up in a place where there wasn't a lot of follow through, and maybe there wasn't a lot of success modeled in various ways. But understanding, how agency can come in and how, so I really appreciate your question, because it's, it's what we do try to do as educators in any field, how we work as professionals in our fields. We want to engage. We want to not lose anybody. We want to keep that ignition turned on. Or if it's not, we want to find a way to see if we can provide a spark. So I think that I wouldn't want to act like it's something that you have, and if you don't have it, or you can't acquire it, or good for you if you have it. I think that rather, what grit means is that you're okay to make mistakes because you're going to learn from the mistakes. And as soon as you start learning from mistakes, like bringing that metacognition in to look at that and realize that, this is a process, this is what I'm doing, that's very empowering, And so I think that part of it is just having conversations, and of course, what's appropriate if it's a kindergartner versus a high school student versus a college student, a professional, how to frame that conversation, but we can be specific so that the message can be communicated.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks. I have one more question, and then we'll open it up to those of you in the room to ask your questions. And I got some in the chat already. Love it. My last question is, what is a dance that you love performing or love watching, or even a dance company or which work, or a dancer? Can go anywhere.
Oh my gosh. Well, go anywhere, and you go in like an octopus in those different directions all at once. Well, I'm just going to keep it first just with the company real quickly, because there's a range. There has been a duet called Rose Room. It's to Benny Goodman's Rose Room. And it evokes ballroom dance. It's a piece of music that would be recognized by many as part of a canon of famous jazz classic work compositions. It's a duet, and what I love about it is that I've never done the dance with a dancer that I haven't just loved dancing with so much. And I probably could say the same about many other works, and certainly with the company, insofar as I can control or have some ability to, but to really enter into the music with a partner, that kind of stereotypical, like, everything's bliss and perfect, in this duet. Everything's, beautiful at the ballet again. But there is something that's really truthful about that. So maybe I shouldn't limit it to one dance, but say there's a series of duet work that I've really always loved dancing with. Working with Stacy Martirana Wiley, who's a UNCSA graduate, but it was NCSA at the time, just bringing in a North Carolina reference for our hostess, from Charlotte, Caroline. But Stacy and I, having had a chance to work together over so many years, it's the way you look and communicate. What you see between actors on stage, that chemistry that you see is real. When the reality of it does permeate and penetrate into the choreography, it's just a joy to be in another space. So I would just say that the dances that I enjoy performing the most are those that allow me to try to get into that zone, which as performers, we always are interested to. It's not there by default. There are performances where our brain won't quiet enough, but we're still doing the work, but those moments where you kind of transcend the steps, those would be the favorite performances that I have. And I think the same would hold true for watching. It could be in any genre. I really enjoyed Fire Island Dance Festival, had a virtual online, so I'm just going to shout out to that because that was great to see. And whether it was Aya Del Casal doing her tap dance, which was riveting, or more modern dance work or more jazz work, the light that comes out from a performer is what's exciting to watch. And that could be from somebody just standing on stage and looking. They might have a little harder time to work with that limited palette to convey their artistry, but yet it can be done. And Elizabeth once wrote something very nice about me that I've always remembered, and she said, "He can command the room simply by spreading his arms." And I don't know if that's verbatim, but I just remember that. And I thought, well, I remember because I passed that on, the idea of that to students. Again, it's not about what we think dance is necessarily about. I've learned that my quirky, idiosyncratic side, getting these reviews at first, quirky. It's like, what's quirky? Who's quirky? Well, I'm quirky, and the work is quirky. And when I embrace the quirkiness, then there's something authentic that's happening. That connects to perseverance and grit. That connects to that pathway of what nugget of advice. how I got here, how you get there, how you're going to where it is you want to go. It's embracing those things that might be a little bit less conventional, comfortable, the awkward, the smudged, the distorted, but those things, that's the stuff of life. So I'm also very much, interested, and I gravitate towards those performers that highlight those idiosyncrasies and that aren't afraid to really make themselves vulnerable so that we have a chance to, have a more dimensional and authentic experience.
That's a lovely answer. I love it. We're going to, there's some questions in the chat. I'm going to take those first, and then others can unmute themselves, but let me get my.
Should I be looking at them, or will you read them, Caroline, for everybody that's?
Yeah, I'll read them to you.
Okay.
Okay, from Elsie in Charlotte. She says, as a college professor, how do you ensure inclusion with your curriculum and resources?
Great. And Elsie, can I ask by inclusion just specifically like how it can be something that's inclusive for anybody? Are you talking about inclusivity of students?
Specifically BIPOC people, like myself, people of color.
Yeah.
Black, Indigenous.
Yeah. Well, I want to respond to that question in various ways, because I think what has been less emphasized in the study of the concert dance form, like modern dance, and especially in more theoretical studying, like dance histories, there hasn't been the emphasis and the equal exploration of what those histories are for Black communities, Indigenous communities, people of color. What was happening, with Native American dance, and not just lumping it in. So I think what happens as an educator is the responsibility to make sure that the curricula is inclusive and that it's comprehensive, and that when we're viewing it from a particular way, like you heard me speak about ballet a lot. So then I would say, well, when I speak about this, ballet form, I'm speaking from a primarily Western tradition. I'm speaking from a primarily, I wasn't speaking about the history of it going back to the 18th century, but it's still a relatively limited perspective of that. One of the things, Elsie, that was so important in my education dancing with Garth Fagan's company, which is a Black dance company and has a very particular mission to celebrate and to allow that history to be part of a larger conversation. I was the only white male dancer at the time that I was in that company, which had between 14 to 16 dancers full-time during that time. And there was a white female dancer in at that time. And that might change at different times, but like Dance Theater of Harlem, it has a particular mission. And so I was fortunate to have that education too, and to be sensitive to and understanding of other issues that might have not been my direct, in my immediate circle, but then became part of my circle. And so what's exciting right now is that as an academic or as a teacher, we understand how this is something that we should be held to great accountability for, and we can make great change. And we can make great change in our disciplines. I'm looking forward to teaching, for example, dance history next year. And what does that even mean? There's no dance history. I've been referring to it as dance histories because that's all there is. There's a plurality of histories. But how can we bring in what was happening in Cuba that we don't know about? What was happening in Brazil? What was happening, what was happening in different countries in Africa? Because for those that that think of African dance as some kind of singularity, well, let's start with that, because there's so much there. And I might only personally be able to share some dance that's from the Congo because I had Congolese training, or I could say, well, this is Senegalese, or this comes from, but also I'm saying that because what's important in order to be inclusive is to recognize when you're not an expert too, and when you're not a specialist, and how we bring in those specialists and how we bring in other professionals to augment a curricula, to come in for master classes as guest lectures, to co-teach, to help form what this curricula can be. So I think that this moment of really understanding how it is that there's been a warped playing field, both in terms of those that have access to be included, Elsie, and then once they're there, what they're being exposed to. Generational shifts bring shifts in the culture. And so this is a really terrific conversation, you know, to ask about how there's a certain responsibility for that to happen as an educator. And certainly as a college professor, I'm working in tandem with not only colleagues, a larger department, but a larger school and a larger set of administrators that share this belief and interest and commitment. And I'll just say, like, even not just as an educator, but even like something that's, I don't think is small, but it's just a detail. Right now, the company is working on a project, and all of the participating dancers involved are working remotely throughout the country where they are. And so, Elsie, I had just thought, well, this isn't unique to this company, but let's bring it into our process now. Everybody's work, it's called the Fantasyland Project, Fantasyland. Okay, well, what about the land that they're actually working on? Whose land was that? So I just sent a note to each of the dancers to please, you know, research the land, and we're gonna be excited to share that when we do our presentation in a few weeks, and how that seeping in. I think it's about not being content to just stick with what you know. We're gonna have a residency in a few weeks. We're working on a property. I wanna know who built this property. I wanna find out more than I can find out. I wanna know, is there Black history with this property? I don't know, I wanna find out. We've contacted the Historical Society. We're contacting another we're trying to do that research so that, again, how do you ensure inclusion? How do you ensure inclusion? Because you can ensure the voices that you're elevating, amplifying, and bringing into the fold, and ensuring that there is some parallel attention being given to the communities that you're teaching.
I love that answer. I just want to say something that stood out in the interview for me was when you said that, you know, no one can tell you that you can't be a dancer. For me personally, I was a dance major in college, and I'm glad that I had professors that highlighted that. But mostly during the day, I was studying ballet and modern, but they did highlight my Zimbabwean roots. But I'm glad that you're intentionally thinking about that, and I'm also excited to see about the next project moving forward.
Thank you, Elsie. So nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing that and for your question.
Love it. Awesome. And next question is from Madeline. Can you talk about your musicality? Your musicality is
Oh, Madeline. Oh, Madeline's here. Everyone, Madeline Dale is a writer of dance and a lover of dance, I could say. Well, when Caroline asked the earliest question about how I got to where I was, sort of early beginnings, I didn't talk about music at all, but I did study music, and you know, it was in me innately. My mother likes to say that I inherited that from her father, who was a jazz saxophonist. I never met my grandfather, so I like that narrative. You know, I like to believe that that was something that just was there, wired into my DNA, that came from him, because he was a performer and did enjoy a lot playing jazz music, which makes me crazy because of how much I love it. But when I was 4 or 5 years old, my sister was studying piano, and I just sat down and I just started playing things without having studied. And then my parents thought, okay, well, maybe he should take lessons now because he's starting to play. But that's kind of curious too, because I then went into that very regimented, not that there was anything that was harsh, not at all, but just in the codified learning of music, it did tamp down on the improvisatory side that I never had a chance to explore, because I was then reading music. I wanted to learn for release. My teacher thought I was a little bit early for that, but I learned for release. I could play for release. So I could learn the music. But in terms of being able to improvise as I can do with fluency and joy and unlimited possibilities as a dancer, I never exercised that as a musician, but it's just interesting when I consider that it was there. Musicality is where the art I think comes in phrasing and understanding the contours and the nuances, the crescendo and the forte and the pianissimo and the rubato and all of these musical terms are the sister to dance. That's how we dance. We dance musically. We're making music when we dance. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question at all, but I'm just aware of how much a love for music drives the exploration of a certain piece of choreography. And what's difficult sometimes, or maybe liberating about a commission, is you may not have that love. Somebody's hiring you to choreograph to this. You're being asked to do this project. What's liberating is that you just have a new set of structures to work within. And then how the challenge of if not falling in love, really falling in like, and certainly understanding it. I feel like some of the music that I love the most, I've just never choreographed to also because, music doesn't need a dance to it, okay? So just to be clear, that piece of music already exists as a piece of art. It doesn't need a dance. It exists already complete. So if one's going to treat it and decide to add something to this pre-existing piece of art that's already complete, how does one converse with that? What does one want to comment on? And I just think that gets into doing research and really understanding so that you can then make whatever decision you're interested to make about that.
Right. She says, I've always seen your work as music in motion. And I've always wanted to see you dance without music.
Okay. Well, thank you for a great suggestion. I mean, I think that, music is there. There's waves that are happening when you just push your hands together. There's vibrations that we're affecting space and molecules are ricocheting like that. There's a music that's there. And then the music that one feels from experiencing that in the interior. I sing a lot when I'm counting, or like the way that I give counts. So I think that there's something that just likes to give that musicality to it. But anyway, thank you, Malin, for these questions and comments.
And anybody else is welcome to unmute themselves or put it in the chat if you don't want to be seen on camera. That's totally fine. The floor is open for more questions, folks.
And Caroline, we would speak for like another 10 or so minutes. Is that about right? Okay, so sure. I'd be thrilled to respond to anybody with anything you might be curious about. And of course, I won't run out of things to talk about either. So, but we know that we need to pause to let the question formulate too.
I have a quick one while people are thinking. I always love to hear auditions. So your audition for Garth Fagan or any other memorable audition that you might have had, went great, went bad, doesn't matter.
Oh, sure. Okay, well then just two quick anecdotes come to mind. One about auditioning. I had spent several months in France as a young artist, and I was in between engagements, had some time, and had a frequent flyer ticket burning a hole in my pocket. So I went, because I'd been traveling a lot and it didn't cost anything, so I could just show up. And I auditioned. I had 14 auditions for French companies. I remember I went to Netherlands too and auditioned for NDT, but there were a bunch of, mostly in France, a bunch of auditions. I even had to improvise to, is Charles Bukowski an American poet, Elizabeth? Is that right? It was some poem of his that we had to, in French.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Like we had to learn it and we had to improvise while we were doing it. I mean, there was, and for sure, having that many auditions in a short period of time in another country was a real sharpening thing. And there were some wonderful conversations and, we'd like to hire you, but we don't have the means to, you're not, a citizen. There were those kind of conversations. And then there were just the rejections. You learned so much from the rejections, of course. One of the greatest auditions was a gig that was in the field we might call an industrial, which I don't hear that term so much now, but it was a commercial project. It was for Mercedes-Benz. And I showed up, you know, in New York in the room. It was what the reason that I received this opportunity was because Mercedes-Benz, being creative, thinking outside the box, they hired modern dance choreographers based in Heidelberg, Germany, and they were looking for modern dancers to do this commercial project. And 4 of us were hired for a month to spend in Ludwigsburg near Stuttgart. And it was the launching of their SUV, but it wasn't called SUV at the time. Okay, this is before there were anything like that. It was their all-activity vehicle. So they built this huge set. We were in this warehouse. We had to learn to rappel. We worked with mountain climbers. We had harnesses on. It was very physical. There was a live singer, and then we came to Detroit and did 12 shows a day for the North American International Auto Show. So it was a great engagement. Company got its first video camera after that engagement. But it was that you go to an audition and you just have that self-esteem and assurance that, you know, I'm not going to change who I am in this moment. Like, I'm not going to learn anything new now. So, and it's easy to say that, of course, but those experiences helped arrive to that place where, you know, you're excited that you're in the room and you get to show what you do. And if somebody else is, you know, interested, then they'll know what to do.
I love it. I love it. We have, and I'm not sure he's exactly from the Jose Limon Dance Foundation, but, oh, sorry, I'll keep reading. Hi, this is.
Oh, it's Dante. Yes, it is absolutely. Dante is the new artistic director of the Jose Limon Dance Company, celebrating its 75th anniversary this year.
Welcome. Nice to meet you, Dante.
Thank you. Sorry, my Zoom is being glitchy tonight, so it keeps cutting out.
Oh, you sound fine right now.
Do you want to ask your question, Dante, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, sure, I can try if you guys can hear me.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your creative process when you're working with your dancers on a new piece versus when you're restaging an older work. And then I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about your audition process.
Sure. So they're very different to create a new work and to set a work. And yeah, just making sure I understood the question right. Yeah. So, well, I'm gonna, when there's a new work, that's a great opportunity for the dancers that are in the studio or in the room, however it's happening. That's so exciting because it's exciting for the choreographer and for the dancers to know that this is going to be something new. I really do not like to waste anybody's time, so I'm going to have ideas, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily just learning this choreography. It's usually more, here's some ideas, let's start working through it, asking the dancers to contribute so that they have a sense of ownership right from the beginning. When you're setting a new work, that's also really exciting in that you have a lot more information about that work. You have clarity of what the choreography is. You have an understanding of what the range could be of performances based on a history of a work being done in a repertory over multiple years. And then you still have that charge to make it relevant now and to give permission for the dancer to, work within the confines and find that freedom. So I love the balance. That's one of the things that's so exciting for me about having a chance to work with repertory over years, is that a work can live, we can resuscitate it, or it may have never fallen out of repertory, but it still needs to stay animated with some sense of urgency or immediacy, even if that's not what it's prioritizing. And so what's exciting is how to fan that flame for the dancers to keep it alive, really. So it's not just a museum piece. Could be a curiosity about seeing that work from 25 years ago, but for it to convey something and to engage with an audience, what is gonna fuel that? And, for the new work, it's again part of that vulnerability I was speaking about earlier as a creator, and sharing that with the dancers. Like if I can let my guard down and say, I don't know, which might not be what they would hear as commonly, or, I'm not sure, but let's explore this. right now we're working on a very different kind of creative process, so I'll just finish by sharing that. We're working on this remote project with 16 dancers in 16 different locations, and I'm still involved choreographically, but there's a lot of agency for the dancer to be a co-creator in this process, and there's a lot of phases to it. It started with written prompts, it started with a lot of writing, and then it started with trying to distill that into a fantasy. What could be, oh, and we're joined by one of our Fantasyland Project dancers I just saw, which is great, Maddie Hertel, Madison Hertel just joined us here. But a process that could really do more than just stay at the surface. And I think that that was, again, what is the goal of the creative process? Well, the goal of this creative process was to dig deeper, to scratch beneath the surface there. So like you have these kind of pillars or objectives of the creative process that's going to be different. This was to really see if we could unearth this idea of fantasy now. Like some of us might wish we were living in a fantasy world right now because reality is pretty awful. And yet, what are ways that this theme could resonate? And then starting to give more shape to it, then I would say, okay, now write 10 more words or write 200 words. And this has all been part of the process, both of those. And then now how are we starting to, where's movement coming from this? I have ideas, but in this case, Dante didn't want to dictate that creative process on the dancers just because I could choreograph 16 solos, but to really let it be collaborative in that way. And now we're at the point where many of these have been completed. Some are still being filmed, but what is the location that best supports this theme? So yes, just because somebody comes up with something doesn't mean it's going to make it. We have to really vet it, but it feels like it's been a really thorough process of a lot of checks and balances. And sometimes, a dancer will say, send me 3 fit photos. Then I need to see it, framed for the video. What do you think? What do you want? And I'll just turn it around and say, thank you for asking that. And I'm happy to share ultimately, so that there's a vision here that's consistent. But what's resonating most with you? Because I want to support that if I can. So that's been our particular process. And the Fantasyland project will have a similar Zoom type environment. We won't be talking at first. We'll be just watching the screening of the film. So it'll be available that night, Friday, July 31st for one night only then, in terms of just being free and available. And all the artists will be joining us for a talk afterwards. There are 16 dancers and original music and costumer, so it brings it a little bit fuller. Just quickly, in terms of audition process, I'm just gonna say this, it's about charisma. I am interested to see who has charisma, because I can teach you the steps. We're not performing tonight. There's time, and even if you could hold the stage, then I'd feel comfortable putting you out there. Mariah Carey could have done a little better job of that when the microphone didn't work. I'm just saying New Year's 2 years ago, because, when the ball's about to drop, if you're on that stage, you can do something. You can make music, right? I'm just saying that's available. And I love Mariah, so I'm not dissing her, but I'm just saying or maybe you felt like she did hold the stage. The point is, you can hold the stage. I want to see that. I'm not necessarily going to teach that. I will help unlock it. I will coax it. I will cultivate it. But it's about energy. It's about trafficking with energy as a performer. And really as a person, right? Just to communicate so that you want somebody to hear you. You want to listen to them. You want to have that exchange. So I really like bold choices and even awkward choices. I just like to see that choices are being made.
I love that. Does anybody have any last little question for Daniel? This has been really fabulous, everybody. Oh, there's some
question or comment. Certainly. The fact that Maddie's here, I'm not going to put her on the spot, but certainly if there's anything just based on collaboration that you might want to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. It's been wonderfully collaborative and has never felt like it was any sort of burden on me, though. Like I've never felt going into it. I maybe was a little nervous, maybe that I was like, oh my gosh, am I gonna have the facilities and the brain power to do all of this? But Daniel, I can speak to that. That Daniel has a wonderful ability to to help you unlock that, to help you unlock collaboratively what the best product is going to be, not just because of what he wants to see, but because of the dancer that I am and the location that I've chosen and all of that good stuff. It's been really great. And I just finished filming yesterday.
Not filming for the first time. So because we don't assume that just because we made it, it's done, I'll say, you know, or it's ready. Like the editing, you know, is ultimately, I think, where the art comes, which doesn't mean you can't be Keith Haring and do that stroke one time and it's done. Picasso shared that same ability just because of his draftsmanship, his technical skills. So like, can art be made first thing off? Sure. You know, we all, right? Like there's so many analogies, like in music, it's like, I'm thinking of Freddie Mercury, like the way in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, like they retell the story of, you know, just like jotting something down and that becomes the song we all love forever. So, I mean, for sure. But at the same time, that's a little less common, you know, and to just bring that deliberation and edit to say, just because I made it, it's not, you know, it's, okay, good for you, but let's look at it and try to see. I just want to note Jamal Barnes, I just noticed this here in the room, another member of the New York dance community for a long time and a very important contributor in choreography, as a choreographer, as an educator, as a dancer, as a performer. So I just am thrilled to see that he's here as well.
I think Elsie has one more thing to sum it all up. You've given a quote already, a really great quote. You have another favorite quote, dance quote, or a quote in general, anything?
Oh, well, I mean, you know, the glass is always half full, if you choose to see it that way. It's a Wonderful Life, just to quote my favorite movie. But that doesn't mean everything's wonderful in it. But we're not going to lose the possibility to keep, you know, that charge. And then I think of Sade, There's No End to What You Can Do. It's just, I don't know why, that just came into favorite singer of mine too. But, you know, yeah, I think, again, the possibility, because that has been my practice as a business person. I didn't go to business school. I didn't, you know, those were things that were self-taught because we can all learn things. And then it's just, again, about the grit and perseverance. So, yeah, I think that, you know, it's up to all of us to just live out the promise that we're interested in and find where we can get support, yeah, to make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure beyond pleasures. I'm excited to keep learning and doing everything that you have also encouraged along the way as well. This will also be on our YouTube channel, and I will also tag Daniel's upcoming show, the July 31st that he mentioned, on our social media and the YouTube. So I'm excited to check that one out. And yeah, thank you, everybody, so very much. Tons of thank yous for everybody here. And Daniel, thank you.
Thank you. And it's so great to be in Charlotte with you virtually. Yeah. I love the great city of Charlotte, North Carolina, the great state, North Carolina. Everybody, so great to see so many friends, and those of you that I don't know that are listening or watching, thank you so much for tuning in. And let's keep the conversation going.
I want to know where you got that t-shirt.
I got it from Daffy's. Daffy's, rest in peace, was a wonderful store that used to have various outlets, locations in Manhattan, and it was just a shame when it closed. They were so...
An old shirt.
What's that, Madeline?
It's an old shirt.
Yes, it is an old shirt, and there's like a little pouch here that's got some beading, but I just like the textures. And then this is a bracelet my mom beaded for my birthday this year. She made for me, and I'm just wearing it just to, since she's not since my parents aren't here with me right now in the chat, they're just here with me through this. And yeah, so I think a little bedazzling is always good.
Good
well,
night.
Dazzle us, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. I'm schwitzing. I don't know about you, but there's some humidity, but I also don't have the AC on, and that's just a little quirk that Elizabeth Zimmer could attest to. But when she's visiting, the AC comes on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Everyone, let's keep the conversation going. We do have an exciting summer of things, and the company we have 3 dancers from the company who are going to be leaving New York City in a few weeks to be upstate, where we're going to develop a whole body of film work with several other dancers joining us locally upstate. So more information on that you can find out about. So
Awesome.
stay well, everybody. Be healthy. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, y'all.